Hey everyone, so today's video is actually going to be something a little bit different. I don't have any Legos to build. Well, my friend is getting me a Gundam set, which we will do a review on. Don't have that yet. So, what I am going to talk about is one of my favorite topics, Ancient Egypt. Why not? Today's specific topic is going to be the pyramids. It actually should be noted that the pyramids are a great way to actually measure both the rise and fall of the Old Kingdom. But I will state this as I go into this. As I'm talking about this topic and about ancient Egypt in general, I will not entertain any form of conspiracy theory or nonsense. The ancient Egyptians weren't some non-existent individuals like the Atlanteans or the people that live in Shangri-La, supposedly. Ancient Kemet, as it was called in its native tongue, was a real place with real people living there. The monuments they built, the religion they practiced, every facet of it came from real, breathing people who lived, died, fought, made love, and who hunted their realm and grew food in their realm. Their descendants, the modern-day Egyptians, and yes, they are in fact the descendants of the ancients. In fact, the only people who can claim the closest genetic tie to ancient Egyptians is modern-day Egyptians. I will accept no information or bring forward no information that is from anything short of actual Egyptologists like Dr. Zahi Hawass, the former head of antiquities and native Egyptian. He is also referred to, by the way, interestingly enough, in Egyptology and specifically throughout Egypt as the Pharaoh. It's literally his nickname. He's also been the most prolific individual to actually discover a ton of tombs, among other major discoveries, even more recently discovering Tut's lost city, the very city, the golden image of the Aten, that actually very well may have actually created most of his jewelry, most of his burial artifacts, in fact. It was a living, thriving city. So, if you're wondering, okay, well, who are you to do all this? Well, book one, literal copy of the Book of the Dead. I actually like this little Anubis there. That's cool. Reminds me a little bit of our logo. Hello! Another book on ancient Egyptian magic that goes a little bit into other more historical fixtures there. Craftworking. Egyptian myths, which actually includes a number of edicts and various written topics from the pharaohs. My personal favorites. National Geographic. Another National Geographic. Invoking Egyptian deities. This, by the way, is a very, very small tasting of my old library I used to have. These are things that I've kind of managed to slightly recover from my old time as a kid and just kind of gravitate toward and grabbed up most recently. Honestly, actually, the Egyptian Book of the Dead is definitely an interesting read. So, Egyptology nerd. Yes, I am. I've watched pretty much every single Egyptology documentary there is, and every Egyptology documentary show. Yeah, I spent a lot of time learning about very, very ancient people who live across the ocean. Kind of a weird obsession of mine. So, let's have a little talk about the pyramids. Now, You'll note that I said that the pyramids were effectively a good measure of both the rise and fall of the Old Kingdom. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, what are you talking about, Old Kingdom? Well, actually, Egypt's many periods actually had several different concepts. We had the Old Kingdom, New Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, Late Kingdom, and then, of course, the Roman period. Now, it should be actually interesting to note that a lot of the most famous pharaohs that we know primarily come from the New Kingdom. So Tutankhamun, his father Akhenaten, Amenhotep III, Seti II and First. You name it. Anybody that was buried essentially in the Valley of the Kings came from the New Kingdom. And they're also, again, one of the most common names that we all know. So, we're going to be delving a little bit back further than that into the Old Kingdom. Now, when pyramids were first being conceptualized, the idea was that the rulers actually originally were not buried in pyramids. They were originally buried in what's called a mastaba, a square rectangular brick place that was essentially a slab of just limestone. Within this would have various chambers for burial goods, temple areas, that sort of thing. Basically anything and everything the ruler of pre-dynastic Egypt or early Old Kingdom pharaohs could want. This kept going for about the first and second dynasty. Then Pharaoh Djoser, oddly spelled with a D, Joser in modern tongue, decided he didn't want to just have one mastaba. He created the first pyramid with his architect, Imhotep. Now, if you're wondering, Imhotep sounds vaguely familiar. Yes, he was, in fact, the priest in the original Brendan Fraser film. But if you're someone like me, you also remember that he's familiar because he's also a god in the Egyptian pantheon. Well, that's actually because the architect Imhotep would later become worshipped by other architects hundreds of years later as a god for his work on the original step pyramid. Imagine getting turned into a god several hundred years later because you just stacked additional tomb stuff on top of each other. That'd be almost as weird as people worshipping Einstein 200 or 300 years later. Now that I've said that, I feel like I've cursed humanity. Anywho, so it actually should be noted that Djoser's pyramid, strangely enough, unlike the pyramids of Giza, built in Giza, where Djoser built his in Saqqara, doesn't actually have internal structure. Djoser's pyramid, for all intents and purposes, was just a massive tombstone. It has a singular shaft that is carved to allow the body to be taken to a specific chamber and sealed up with granite. This granite plug would seal over an underground network. In this underground network was not only the pharaoh's body, but all of his grave goods. Everything he could possibly need or want. Now, it should be noted that while all the pyramids were in fact used as, well, grave sites, it wasn't their sole practice. They were, in fact, supposedly, there was a spiritual point to them as well. That spiritual point was that they were supposed to be resurrection machines. You see, the ancient Egyptians believed that the world and the universe came from a singular mound that came up from the waters of chaos, essentially the waters of the universe. From this mound came the gods Ra, Nefertum, and many others. Basically, all of the primal deities came from this mound. So the idea by building the pyramids was to essentially replicate that mound. thereby giving the pharaoh's soul an ability to be reborn into the afterlife, which is why they use the pyramid shape. Interesting. Later dynasties would, like Khufu, would try to do a more true pyramid shape. It's actually in this that we can see the development of the pyramid itself. From stacked mastaba step pyramids to true pyramids, the Egyptians had some pretty interesting things to tackle. In fact, good old Khufu's bent pyramid is a pretty big example of them trying to figure out how to do this correctly. The bent pyramid was essentially where they tried to build the pyramid with... hang on one second, my brain's... Sorry about that. I had to take a minute trying to do all this from memory. It doesn't work. Thankfully, I have handy-dandy books. Yay for resources! But yes, the bent pyramid of Khufu really does show us pretty much the development of the pyramid. First, his specific designers tried to build a more wide-based pyramid. Then, as pretty much the stone started sliding from the outer casing, causing a massive slip through the tunnel system into the interior of the pyramid, they tried to save the pyramid by doing a less steep incline, thus giving the bent pyramid, well, literally its name, the bent pyramid. With the more wider incline then to a more steeper one. But unfortunately, they had to abandon it. At that stage and point, there wasn't saving anything. Pretty much the Egyptians decided, yeah, no, this thing is probably coming down. Let's get the hell out of here. Imagine ancient architects being smarter than some of the modern ones sometimes. And that is how we get these beauties. Now, the fourth dynasty would show 3 pharaohs building these pyramids. Khufu, his son, the good King Khafre, and his grandson, Men-Khafre. Now I'm thinking about it, there wasn't really a whole lot of naming distinction, was there? Whatever. But the pyramids that I just mentioned are the ancient pyramids of Giza, the ones that everyone knows about and has spoken a lot. Now, it has been said, and there are of course rumors going around that some of these things were built by, that these were possibly built by slaves and so on and so forth. That's actually not true. The pyramids were in fact built by paid, skilled workers. In order to build these pyramids, the pharaohs went out and conquered vast lands to obtain resources and material, namely copper for chisels and various other tools, as copper itself was not exactly, well, readily available. In fact, after taking back much of the original territory that Egypt had conquered in ancient times and colonized, yes, colonized. Egypt was the first originators of the colonization idea. Come on. Where are you, bastard? Really? They made a King Tut Lemons brand? I'm not even going to question that. Moving on. Yes, I have read these. I just forgot that that was a thing. Like I said, major Egyptology nerd. There are things that I forgot that I'm just like, more than likely I've read it and I sat there and go, That's interesting. Moving on. The things that people come up with, they're weird. Aha! As you can see, this darkened area is pretty much all of the region that ancient Egypt ruled, all the way far down into modern Sudan and Ethiopia. Effectively, ancient Egypt ruled throughout most of ancient Palestine, Israel, Saudi Arabia. Basically, a lot of territory. Well, when you need to build, holy crap, tall pyramids about 450 to 1,000 feet tall, yeah, you're gonna conquer a lot of people. Now, there has been, of course, some people asking how in the world they managed to build these things in a time when the wheel hadn't been invented. Yeah, that's an interesting bit for you. The pyramids went up before the wheel showed up. Through more recent archaeological discoveries, it's actually shown that where now it is a dry riverbed, Giza actually had a thriving port and city. The Egyptians pretty much just brought the stone on the via ship, offloaded it, brought it up giant limestone ramps, put it into place, filled in the gaps, and let the stone masons go ham on it. Now, it should be noted, like I said, these guys were actually paid craftsmen. Albeit, this is an interesting wage for you. I'd surmise it as being something more akin you give your buddy for helping you move a couch in. But just to prove that I'm not talking out my arse, an interesting quote from our friendly National Geographic magazine from a local priest who is in charge of employing the laborers. I paid them in beer and bread. Yeah, they were paid in booze and food. Not a little bit of booze and food either. In fact, according to reputable sources, we're talking somewhere around at least 3 massive jars full of bread and 5 massive jars full of beer. And you thought you got wasted after work. In fact, it should be noted that, interestingly enough, ancient Egypt is where we get our first ever workers' strike. Building pyramids, no less. Yes, it's actually interesting that during the construction of Khare's pyramid, there was a legitimate workers' strike, the first ever to actually occur in history. It should also be noted that the Egyptian pyramid builders were actually treated fairly well. They had the best medical care available in ancient times. They had the availability of their housing being taken care of, their families being taken care of in the event of their death or injury. Essentially, they even had what was effectively disability. If you got injured and couldn't work on the pyramids anymore, they still took care of you and your family. And in some cases, if as a thanks to your work, you would be buried next to the pyramid, close to the king. And it's interesting. We know all of this, of course, because of the many tombs of the different foremen, the workers, the heaps and heaps of papyri that are left over. Yes, we've discovered a ton of papyri that detail who worked on the pyramids, how much they were paid. We even have the bakeries that baked the bread, the breweries that brewed the beer, the houses they lived in, the tombs they were buried, The the mortuary sites that they were prepared for death. Today, the pyramids of Giza just look like they're just sitting in the middle of nowhere. But by the time they were actually being built, there was a massive city around them. The same thing, oddly enough, with the Valley of the Kings. There were massive cities built around the Valley of the Kings where all the artisans prepared all the grave goods for all the different pharaohs, King Tutankhamun included. Also, here's a little bit of information for you. Tutankhamun was not actually Tutankhamun's original name. His original name was Tutankhaten, meaning living image of the Aten. Mainly because his dad was the first person to ever try and do monotheism. Didn't work out too well. In fact, from what we've been able to find and argue, it's been quite possible that we have indeed found Akhenaten's mummy. They hacked his face off. Dude was not popular, to say the least. Anywho, we'll leave that as its own video. But as these pyramids and the wealth grew from the building of the Great Pyramids and the pyramids from earlier pharaohs, with great wealth sometimes comes great discord. We see this in later pharaoh pyramids being built, as they go from being built with limestone block to being built with mud brick, as the wealth pretty much started getting to the heads of local governors and various officials. These officials essentially decided to try and become their own miniature pharaohs, each ruling their own little nomes, and sometimes quite literally ignoring the decree of the actual pharaoh quite often. Eventually, this would inevitably lead to the complete and utter decline and destruction of the Old Kingdom, leading to the First Intermediate Period. This would also cause things like the Hyksos to show up. The Hyksos being a Semitic people that basically took over all of Lower Egypt, which I still find that that's kind of weird that Lower Egypt is north and Upper Egypt is south. Yeah. It is what it is. But, no. Pretty much, it's amazing what the pyramids do tell us, if anything, is a tale of very hardworking people. People willing to do pretty much anything for their god kings and willing to fight against chaos and bring rebirth to the pharaoh, therefore keeping order in place. The pharaoh was believed to have two souls. One that would be judged by Osiris and either destroyed or sent to the Field of Reeds, and another divine soul sent to join Ra's entourage, there to fight against the demons of the Duat, in the realm of darkness, fighting throughout the night to see that the dawn should rise again. For this, the pharaohs were prepared, well, as best as they could be. It should be noted, however, that despite all of their preparation, despite all of the security features that the pyramids, including the ones in Giza, had, the entrances to the pyramids of Giza had 3 giant granite stone slabs put in place to prevent people from getting in. But the thieves managed to tunnel in nonetheless. These same tunnels are what people are taken through and shown as tours of the pyramids to this day. And unfortunately, we don't have any remains from the Old Kingdom pharaohs, except for one, Pharaoh Djoser. And unfortunately for us, the only remains we have left of him is his left foot. During the times of these pharaohs, they were raided heavily by tomb raiders, seeking wealth, fortune, and glory in a sense. These tomb raiders wasted no time. They had no sanctity for the body of the dead that they were robbing. They tore pharaohs to pieces, shredded their bodies into 1,000 parts, often sometimes burning, selling, or otherwise destroying them in any capacity. And of course, it doesn't really help either when Westerners showed up on Egypt's door. It was actually common practice for wealthy aristocrats, having paid Egyptologists, I should say, at the time, quite a bit of money, to have unwrapping parties, where the body was unceremoniously taken apart, wrappings that had been so carefully put onto the body removed. And in some cases, throughout Egypt and many other nations, hi kitty kitty, these bodies of ancient people would be chopped up to bits and used to fuel trains. You heard me correctly. Used as train fuel. In fact, the only reason we have the pyramids today is, oddly enough, thanks to a very cheeky engineering official of Egypt, who, in order to save the pyramids from individuals seeking to use their parts and bricks for public works, managed to convince their bosses that it would cost more to simply disassemble the pyramids than it would be to simply just get new brick. Through their cheeky deception, we now have the pyramids still remaining, though a number of them have quite frankly lost a bit of their luster. The limestone has lost its polish, its shine throughout the years, yet the pyramids of Giza have stood for thousands more. It is once said, man fears time, but time fears the pyramids.